Hey everybody, today we'll be talking about starting and getting funding for a new game studio. And with us to discuss this are the very recent founders of 3 game studios, all of whom have recently raised venture capital rounds of funding. First, we have Antti Hattara from StarBerry, second, Emily Greer from Double Loop, and third, Travis Boatman from Carbonated, Inc. So today what we're going to be talking about is what it takes to start a game studio and how to get funding for the studio, and more specifically, 1, what is the current environment for starting a game studio? 2, what are the key opportunities to pursue? 3, what does the funding environment look like? 4, what are key challenges? And 5, advice for new founders. And before we get started, I'd like to just kind of hand it over to our 3 founders here for a brief introduction and some context about your backgrounds, and maybe starting with you, Antti.
Sure. Yeah, hi all. I'm Antti Hattara, CEO and founder of StarBerry Games in Berlin. I've been working in casual mobile games for the past 15 years. I started my career at Digital Chocolate in Helsinki with product management, and after 7 years, then moved on to Berlin and Wuga, where I was building and running one of the internal studios where we did matching games, Jelly Splash among others. And in 2017, I co-founded Chatterbox Games in Berlin. We jumped early onto the messenger games market. We then pivoted after 1.5 years and rebranded as StarBerry. We've then shipped Idle Coffee Corp last year with a publisher, Boombit. And now we've raised a seed round of $1.2 million in Q1 to expand the team and to ship even bigger and better mobile games.
Okay. Emily?
Yeah, my previous experience in the game industry is I was co-founder and first COO, then CEO of Congregate. So back in 2006, spent 13 years there and went through the whole cycle there from when it was just me and my brother to raising first an angel round and then a venture round in 2006, 2007, selling to GameStop. Built a platform and then a mobile publisher, and then as in recent years, started buying studios, and that made me realize that I really wanted to run a studio, that after all these years in games, I wanted to get to the dance and actually make games, and I wanted to make games for myself, which is a mobile player and who's looking for relaxation. So started Double Loop Games last year around Q3, and then raised $2.5 million from LVP, One Up, and Angels back in December.
Great. Travis?
Cool. So much fun talking to you guys. So I've been doing games since I started in the late 80s, and I switched to mobile in the late 90s. So started in mobile around 1997, 98. Big fan of mobile games, sort of found my passion, found my love. So I love working in the mobile game space. I joined a company called JamThat in around 2000, and we were sort of a pure play mobile publisher. Sort of head of studios, working under one of the founders there. At the very beginning, we took the company public, I think in 2004, and then sold to 2006 to Electronic Arts. And we became what is now EA Mobile. And I stayed around. A lot of folks left, but I stuck around because I was passionate about, I think, where mobile was going. And when we sold EA, this is prior to the iPhone showing up. So it's a little bit of a belief and betting on fate. But fortunately, the iPhone showed up, and then shortly thereafter, Android and app stores and purchase and freemium and all the rest of that stuff. So I had a really fun ride, sort of riding the wave of the new smartphone market. For the next bunch of years at EA Mobile, made lots of great titles and had studios all over. And then with the rise of freemium and sort of live ops and data-driven design kind of coming from the East, but really being pioneered a lot by Zynga, I wanted to follow the learnings. And so I ended up leaving Electronic Arts and going to Zynga as SVP of mobile, and had a bunch of great years at Zynga. Same thing, sort of building the next part of the Zynga platform, not just Facebook and social, but actually getting onto mobile. And spent a bunch of years doing that with great folks at Zynga. And I think a lot like Emily, I miss getting close to games and making stuff. And it's great being at these big companies that have great reach, but you sort of miss the passion about building games and getting close to customers and close to that. So I decided to start my own company, found an amazing bunch of founders and teammates, and we founded the company together. And we've been kind of working on Carbonated for about 4.5 years. We actually are a little bit different journey. We had a couple years of work for hire, which I can talk about later. But more recently, we raised a pretty large seed round from Andreessen, Golden, and Bitcraft at about 8.5 million, and we're kind of off to the races now. But definitely a shift for us from being a work for hire service company to going venture, and I can talk about that more in a bit.
Right. So maybe just diving right in, let's talk about the current environment. In terms of the landscape, why is now a good time to start a game studio? Or maybe it's not. Maybe are you guys starting a game studio despite a challenging environment? What do you guys think?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think it's always a good time. So that depends on a few things. But for now, there's a couple of things to look at. Opportunity. I think games space still evolves and so fast and constantly that there's these new opportunities coming up. I think one of the recent ones that's quite interesting is hyper casual, kind of new audiences, new way of UA, and that. Then of course funding, if you're not bootstrapping, is kind of one of the things. There's been quite a few kind of new gaming focused early stage VCs that's popped up in the couple of years. So there's definitely a lot of audience to listen to your pitch. And maybe also a chance to get funding, and definitely a lot of angel investors in the space as well, with a lot of exits in the past 10 years. So it's a VC fundable opportunity. Small teams can get big results. And then I think, competition or barriers to entry is one of the other aspects, but and that's maybe a bit tougher. There's quite a bit of competition for talent. Getting a self-publishing organization and learning the ropes of UA and everything is going to be a challenge for any company. But there's also good things on maybe that aspect, like the ability to use some services, tech platforms, so you don't have to build everything yourself that you maybe had to do in the past 5 years. So that's kind of my take, that it's definitely a good time. There's all these kind of classical analysis of where's the opportunity and barriers to entry and the chance for funding. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always both a bad time and a good time to start something in games, because it's been growing so consistently, so strongly for decades, that there's always opportunity. And it's it's such a huge market that there's a lot of different ways to carve out a good business or a great business there. That being said, it's also really competitive on all the platforms now. So, that it's I think it's much harder in mobile, for example, to bootstrap something versus what it was. On the other hand, we raised for Congregate in 2006, 2007, and we got funded because we were a platform. There was huge resistance to funding content that faded a little bit during the mobile social gold rush, and then kicked back in very strongly for years, and that is relaxed. So there's a lot. The number of VCs that are open and interested in talking about games, let alone the ones that are focused on games, is much larger than it has ever been. And that definitely, for a certain kind of studio, creates a great opportunity.
Yeah, I basically agree. I think that it's sort of the golden age of gaming, and from my experience, there's no better time to start games than now. Granted, I'm a hyper optimist, so just I'll sort of categorize that with everything that I say. I'm very optimistic all the time. I think that's important in
don't start studios.
Yeah, you got to be optimistic. I sort of joke. You look at prize fighters, like professional fighters. Ask any of them before they go into the fight if they think they're going to lose. Right? Every prize fighter is like, I'm going to beat that. They're always going confident and excited, and ready to win. So you sort of have to. So I'm very much that way. So just sort of categorizing that. Mm-hmm. But that said, I think there's a lot of data to back that up, particularly now. The market is vast and growing. What Emily said. There are, if you're a startup, then you're doing something you're passionate about or have experience in, you can make games on any platform. Mobile, PC, console, web, free to play, paid. There's services now from Apple where you can be part of their subscription service. So if you don't want to do free, you can do paid now. There's multiple stores all over. There's funding coming from Epic and publishers as well as venture, and there's service money out there. I mean, it is just one of the best times to make games. The other thing too is if you're a startup, it used to be that you had to have incredibly, and I'm not saying you don't, one of my thesis is great technology, but you couldn't start a studio unless you had great technologists. Now you can be a content creator and leverage technology tools that come off the shelf, whether that's Unreal, Unity, GameLift. There's so much tech that you can take off the shelf for free and not have to have depth of experience in those technologies, like an engine builder, for example. You could just grab Unity. So I think that's leveling the playing field and allowing more people to come into the space. Of course, the downside of all that is it just means more competition. And so again, echo sort of what Emily said about, look, it's one of the best times to do it. It's one of the easiest times to do it. The market's vast and growing. There's money flowing in, but it just means there's lots and lots of competition. So if you're going to get in the space, you got to be ready to work extremly hard and compete very aggressively, simply because you're competing with everybody on planet Earth and in every market with every piece of technology. But it is a really exciting time to be in the space and compete. So I think it's actually one of the easiest times to get into games that I've ever seen in my career. And like I said, I started in the late 80s, but it is competitive.
In terms of like the shelter in place, current pandemic, has that impacted the current environment for starting a studio in terms of whether it's funding or raising financing? Travis, it kind of seems like you're indicating that it's actually not a bad time. And then what about hiring? How's that impacted hiring for you guys?
I'll jump in and I'll bail out again. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the best times to raise. I mean, it's terrible what's going on around, but if there is a beneficiary of people being sheltered in place, it's people, streaming TV and shows on their televisions, although it's hard to film those shows, so those shows are drying up. People love playing games, sort of endless content with games, and you can keep making content if you're working from home. Most digital practitioners like us can work just fine from home, where I think if you're TV filming, it's hard to go out with the crew and the film on location. So games both do extremely well during this time because everyone's sort of playing them, both in HD and in mobile games, as well as the ability to make more content and make more games. So you're seeing kind of a pretty good boom in mobile and HD gaming today. And I think the venture folks are quite aware of that. And I think you're seeing many of the announcements that you're seeing about fundraising are happening during the middle of the pandemic. I mean, we raised and announced during the middle of the pandemic. So I can speak from personal experience that it is very doable during these times. It's scary to say that we're one of the few sort of businesses that does really well now. But it is digital games are a beneficiary of these times, sadly.
I think the effects are not totally even. It always matters for any individual firm is what's the situation with their LPs and can they make capital calls, because that can have some downstream effects in terms of, one VC may be fine and totally aggressive and one may need to pull back a little bit just because they can't make quite as many investments. But definitely games are sort of showing at the head of the line. My feeling was like there was a, kind of a 6 weeks, 2 months where people were figuring things out and things paused a little bit, and then they've opened quite a bit back up, and you can just judge by, am I being called on reference checks? Am I getting inbound from people? And that's definitely opened up, and you can feel the interest and excitement for games.
Yeah, I think I heard it on some panel with actually VCs and the same question being asked. So I think their answer was basically then that it's slowed down a bit. And then that's what I would kind of think as well, that it's just that spontaneous meetings at conferences, the hype is a bit tougher to get. So I'll need to figure out how that's going to work with all the calls and all of that, and how to kind of get the momentum going during these times. And I think it's the same thing with hiring, that it's across borders, especially in Europe. It's just a bit slower. I don't think it's impossible, but you're kind of more restricted to looking at local market for quick hires. And yeah, we've got smaller countries than kind of compared to the United States, where I think you can switch between states still much easier than here between countries.
Yeah, though also, we had planned to be distributed from the start. So it essentially going to shelter in place didn't change our situation that much. But that was partly because, my co-founder and I are based in San Francisco, which is, one of the most difficult and expensive markets to hire. And so we were like, let's open it up. We actually doubled our team size in pandemic, including hiring, several people that we'd known before, but also people that we never got a chance to meet in person, and onboarding them. And I was much more worried about it, and it's turned out just fine. And people are. Especially again, once you got past those first few weeks, people are open and looking, and the fact that everybody's worked from home now does make some things a little bit easier, at least in the US, I would say.
I thought we could shift to talking about opportunities and maybe digging into the motivation behind each of you starting your own studios. And if you could tell us a little bit about, what was the thesis that convinced investors to invest in your startups. It'd be great to hear sort of what your stories are.
The truth is with seed rounds, a lot of it is, it's a little bit thesis, but a lot of it is team and experience, and do they think you can really do something? So, I think it's not a coincidence that all of us are pretty veteran. So just having that experience really makes a huge difference. In terms of my overall thesis, for me, I still think, mobile is now 50% of all game revenue, and the people who don't think of themselves as gamers, I actually hate the phrase casual and try to avoid saying it, are about 70% of the market. And I feel like if there's any part of the game market that's underserved, it's that. And as a very specific consumer of it, I feel that there are a lot of people making games for it, but not a lot of people making it with who are the audience and who really understand the motivations. And so I wanted to jump in on that. I'm coming in from the point of view of why do I play games? And I play them for relaxation, and I play them for connection. So those are our two pillars, are, making truly relaxing games and improving community and social on mobile for people who don't think of themselves as gamers.
So maybe like all the way back into the kind of the deeper motivation. So for me, it kind of the spark came from a philosophical thought from Future Play founder Yami, who kind of boils it down to a single question, and is finding a company something you want to get done in your career or in your life when you kind of get older. And then he kind of pulls up this question, and I'm like, yeah, that's a well put. So that kind of is the spark, because when that's a yes, then you kind of start having more open eyes and start to look at these opportunities. And so that was kind of a yes for personally for myself. And then I kind of figured that, I want that learning experience of finding a company and getting the learnings, everything that comes with entrepreneurship, and then kind of getting back to small teams, hands-on work, and kind of building something without process, too much of that big company process, and high risk, high reward is exciting. And for us, the opportunity came with then Facebook Messenger games platform. It was kind of that's an easy one for early stage, because it was a new platform, potential disruption, and that was kind of the pre-seed round we did. Now for the seed round, then we already, I would say that still, because it wasn't that sizable seed round. So I think that was still based on a lot of the team, and for us, we then had kind of the results with Idle Coffee Corp to show. So I think we kind of grinded our way there.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always had a very sort of similar career path lens, and also sort of link that to how that became a startup world. But the reason I joined the games industry is I love the idea of sort of entertaining large audiences with technology, and that's sort of why I got into the business in the first place. And I typically gravitated to publishers because they had access to the audience. That's sort of why I went to Jamdad. It's sort of why I went to EA. It's why I went to Zynga. They had the audience. And what's interesting these days is more and more traditional publishing technologies are getting commoditized. And what that does is it allows you to get close to customers without necessarily having to go to a big publisher. And so I saw that happening over time at EA and Zynga, and it got to the place now where I thought, well, if I really want to follow my passion, I want to be able to entertain large audiences and get as close to them as I can, you don't need to go to a publisher. In fact, it's actually detrimental to go to a publisher. You want to get really close to your customer. You want to be on the studio level. You want to be on the team that is making the content and delivering the content directly to customers. And so for me, that's sort of always been my path in the industry. And commoditizing tech sort of led me to smaller studios. In terms of what Carbonated is doing, it is sort of a link of that. We wanted to make a very high-speed live ops platform so that we could talk to customers directly and give them content. So part of Carbonated has a platform attached to it, which we call Carbine, but that is about getting customer feedback and giving them content really quickly. The second part is very personal experience. I grew up playing hardcore console games, Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty and, all those great games. But I also love mobile. And so we said, well, look, at some point, Moore's law is not dead. Mobile devices are going to keep getting faster. And eventually these kind of hardcore games are going to start to appear on mobile phones more and more. And they're going to be hard to control because typically you see they port these kind of console games over, and the big tell you can see a console game sort of ported over is when they have digital D-pads. That's sort of my favorite tell. They're not natively designed for touchscreens. And so we started to think about that and said, well, what's a way that you could take these very mature, beautiful, amazing high-end games and play them natively on a mobile phone? So we spent a fair amount of time thinking about that and came up with this thesis, which is you could solve that with an AI layer. So you have an AI layer that essentially, I won't get into all the details of it, that'd be a long talk, but it basically removes the need for all those buttons. It removes the digital D-pad, it removes all those buttons. And so we spent a fair amount of time thinking about that and figuring out how we would solve it. And we basically came up with a pretty good solve, we think, and we got excited about doing it, and that's ultimately where Carbonated came from. But it really is those kind of hardcore games, making them easy to play by using an AI layer and attaching to it a live ops platform so that we can respond quickly to customers.
And for some of the folks in our audience who might be thinking about starting a game studio, in terms of other opportunities, Antti, I know you mentioned a few opportunities you saw in your introduction. Whether it's AI like you're talking about, Travis, do you guys have any thoughts on other opportunities out there that you think might be attractive?
I mean, I think ultimately you're going to do the best job at something that you're passionate about. So think about the part of games and that you are really attracted to and that you have something to say about, because coming into a competitive part of the industry and just kind of copying, and because you want to be there, you're not going to make anything really great. And the things that are really great are what inspiring. The thing is that almost all parts of games are growing. So, if you really, really love, console games or PC games or something like that, there is room there. It might look different. It might be less likely to be a VC-backed company. I think in mobile, it's, as I said, it's hard to bootstrap, but there's opportunities all over, and it's just really important that you be tackling something that you're passionate on and have a strong point of view.
Got it.
Yeah, I guess there's few kind of all the way from incremental opportunities to something wild that you might want to look at hyper casual, and how is that? The question is really where does it go? How does it evolve? Is there an opportunity in the casual space? And or I'm still fascinated by multiplayer casual games like the .io and Trivia Royales and the kinds. But maybe the wild one is kind of influencers, new audiences that come from this kind of a hybrid of streaming and like influencer, how they are part of the whole media package nowadays. So I think there might be some bigger opportunities for new platforms and complete new type of stuff.
Yeah, and I'll sort of bridge off. I love Emily's answer. I'll sort of bridge off that a bit. Yeah, I think passion is one of the most important things, again, because this business is so competitive. I sort of have a lens that I use personally, so I'll sort of explain my lens and then link it to the answer. But I sort of always think games are three parts. They're one part technology, they're one part business, and they're one part sort of creative. And I think the founders and teams that have passion and really are dedicated to their craft typically are good at different parts of those things. And I think there are great engineering houses out there that come at games from a technology perspective and can very much win that way. I think there's game teams that come at it from a business perspective and can be very good at that craft and win that way. I think there's some teams that come at it purely from a creative standpoint and create amazing creative games and can win at it from that standpoint. I think what's neat about all the founders out there, hopefully a lot of young folks, is they don't necessarily listen to us, and they follow their passion, and they think about how the business is structured, whether they're technologists or artists or business folks. All of those passions can lead to great wins in this space. And I'm just frankly excited to see what the young folks do out there. I sort of scrape the app store and I look at what's popular and what's cool all the time. And there's so much amazing stuff that pops up. But I think I'm an optimist, but I think there's lots of different ways that you can win. But it is competitive. And so you have to be very, very good at something. Whatever that craft is, I think is wide open. But you do have to be kind of good at it and chase it with a lot of passion, because you're competing with so many folks out there.
Right. And so talking now about funding and the funding process, there's been a lot of comments around large competition. Could you talk about, when it comes to whether it's fundraising or bootstrapping, is because of the competition, is now not possible to bootstrap? Are we in an environment where you have to raise a large amount of capital in order to compete in the environment? And then for each of you, when you're coming up with the amount of money to raise, and so Emily, for you 2.5, and Travis, whether it was 8 or 8.5, how did you come up with that number and the specific milestone you're going after?
I mean, I think it's absolutely possible to bootstrap. I think you just have to understand what parts of the market are going to work with that kind of strategy. I think bootstrapping is totally feasible in sort of indie PC market, and is in fact the norm, where you get enough through to have a demo, to get a publisher, to go through that kind of process. I think hyper casual, where you can make games very quickly again, and then work with a publisher, is a great opportunity for for a small team starting out. For me, the kind of game that I wanted to make, and the kind of ambition I had, which was top 20, top 50 grossing on mobile, something really big and meaningful. I very seriously considered bootstrapping, and then was like, no, to do that kind of thing, you need marketing, you need that capital. And what I want is aligned with VCs in terms of, the big thing. And so that's the direction I'm going. In terms of the amount, the 2.5 is just a start. I have a sort of an overall plan of how much I'm going to need, and I split it. Okay, I'm going to do 2 at the seed, but it was oversubscribed, so I let it get a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to do kind of 8 to 10 at Series A, and then have a whole plan. There's not just fundraising is not a one-part event. It's a multi-part event, especially if you're going for a larger company. So you should think about how you're staging and sequencing. What will you have proved with that first amount of capital before you go for the next? How is your runway gonna work from round to round? So you think of it as a process and not just like one amount.
That sounds like a seasoned like expert, because that's it feels like that's what I learned as we go, kind of the first round founder. So it's and definitely I would also agree that bootstrapping is kind of what you probably will have to somehow start with your own savings in any ways. Like a recruiter is not going to come and get you off LinkedIn to say that you're going to find a company. It's you'll actually have to do it yourself, and then you'll be without a job for a while unless you somehow manage to pull it off as a side project, but that's not going to be easy. You'll somehow need to bootstrap to get either a very stellar team together, because for the funding environment at the moment, you need those co-founders. It's either going to be a stellar team lined up, and that's going to help you get the credibility for raising, or then you're going to be just like getting hands-on and actually building something, a prototype or a demo to do that, or work for hire. We did a few gigs in our first year when we bootstrapped the whole year. So those definitely help. But I think I learned a few on the process of like trying to skip the seed round or the angel round, pitching for bigger numbers at the very early stage, when I don't think we had that much of the team together that would justify for it. So I think for first-time founders and maybe smaller teams or a few individuals, then kind of thinking thinking through the angel round. They're going to help you justify. That might help you put the team together, and then you kind of go from there. So kind of a step-by-step plan.
Absolutely good. Two good points for both Congregate and then for Double Loop. My brother and I had a little bit of money that we saved that we put in that our father matched, and we used that to get to a demo. And we had been talking to VCs for several months, but at the moment that they could see the live alpha, that was when term sheets started flooding in. So especially when you're a first-time entrepreneur, you need to show a little bit more. As a second-time entrepreneur, you get a pass, and so you can kind of essentially skip that round. But I also for Double Loop, I started it with some of the money that I had from the Congregate sale. So that's a very, very common pattern, and you should expect to need to show something and to show something concrete, unless it's your second or third startup, or you were the lead designer on $1 billion game. That's the other one that gives you a few steps.
Yeah, that all sounds totally true. I think for us, it was interesting because when we started out, we had a particular thesis for these kind of high-end games and this sort of problem we were solving. But early folks that we talked to actually sort of said, we don't see any of those games in the market, so that's not really a problem. And we said, no, these hardcore games, they're coming. And this is, again, before Fortnite, before PUBG on mobile, before Call of Duty on mobile. And so we got a fair amount of resistance early on. And so part of our path was going work for hire was because it was actually hard for us to raise early on, to be totally honest. So it ended up being a blessing in disguise because it was relatively easy for us to get work for hire work out of the gate. And it was great for us in the sense that it allowed us to, over the next, I guess, almost 3 years of doing that, to build our platform, to refine our thesis, to have a team that knows how to work together. We had a little bit of hubris coming and said, we're all these experienced people, we've been doing games forever, we know how to do this. And then we had some good advice from a venture person who said, well, yeah, you've done this independently, you've never worked together as a team. That makes us nervous. And I said, we'll figure it out. And we did. But to be fair, I understand now why some of those venture folks said, yeah, you're all really experienced, but you've never actually worked together. So that's high risk. And the venture folks are always looking to reduce risk. And so I think for us, the service work that we did eliminated a tremendous amount of risk. So by the time that we raised, our platform that we had sort of theorized was up, running, demonstratable, and was sort of, I wouldn't say best in class, but quite good. Our AI tech and our partnerships that we had built at that point was fully playable, worked, was demonstratable. So our thesis wasn't theoretical anymore. We could actually show it to them and play it. So much to Antti's and Emily's point, it was demonstratable. And then lastly, we did kind of a fun partnership with Amazon. So we actually were at the Amazon booth at GDC, and we showed this stuff live, not just to investors, but sort of to the world, and said, hey, look what our tech can actually do. And we got to throw some heavy traffic at it. And I think, we also throw our work for hire a little, again, sort of linking to Emily's point. We're able to use those dollars to build up a lot of what our company is today. And again, that's a form of reducing risk. So by the time that we raised, we had so many sort of great tools that were mature that it made a lot of sense for investors to bet on us, or at least that's how it turned out. The other thing I think also to sort of double down on Emily's point is it depends on what you're building. And if you're building a really small game, you don't need to raise that much. They're going to want to see a proof of concept very, very quickly, and even metrics. For a much bigger game, much more complex game, it has some advantages in that it removes a lot of competition. So the bigger of a game that you make, or the more expensive it is, the less competition you're going to have. However, it means it's more risky, and investors are going to push you harder for how do we reduce risk. If we're going to give you this much capital to build a larger game, you've got to figure out how to reduce that risk. And so the game that we're building is a big game. It has real-time multiplayer. It has all the social systems and all the content systems that you'd expect from a best-in-class mobile freemium game. But that stuff's large and expensive. So it requires the capital, but we had to reduce all that risk in advance before we went out there. So for us, the service work was sort of a replacement for those early rounds, is the way to think about it.
Yeah, you call it your $8.5 million a seed round, but based on both the amount and like how much you had to show for it, I in my head it's an A.
And could one of you guys talk about the process from like intro to, getting the money in the bank? What does that process look like? And then also just in terms of like how much of your time that it takes. I was reading that some entrepreneurs are spending like 50% of their time, or in some cases, all of their time just actively fundraising. So I'm not sure what that actually means. Like, what do you do when you actively fundraise? It's hard for me to understand where all that time is going to.
You're talking a lot. You're having lots of calls, and it's sometimes you're talking to DCs, but a lot of, especially when you don't yet have connections, you are talking to your friend who raised before and getting their advice, and then getting an intro to the next person, getting an intro to the next person. So you're chaining introductions until you're pitching, and then there's early conversations, and then there's proper pitches where you're bringing in more of the team and have a deck, and then there's partner meetings. Now this is a little bit different in COVID because they're not having you drive down to Sand Hill Road and meet with 15 people in the same way, but I think that's still that process of kind of warming up conversations. And an investment is not as much about a pitch as it is about a relationship, and usually relationships get built up over time. So the easiest way to get to yes is if they already know you, or they saw you 6 months ago and you said, I'm going to do this, and then you come back in 6 months and you show them what you did, and then, as Travis was talking about, that reduces risk. You've proved that you can do what you say you're going to do. So actively raising is about kind of building up those steps. And then there's also just so many VCs out there right now that are interested in games, as there's a lot of people to potentially talk to.
Got it.
And I agree with the 50 to when you're actively raising, that 50 to 100% is, I think, is right on. And that's one thing as a warning to studio founders: if you are the creative director and the development director and fundraising, that is really hard and really problematic. In my studio, my co-founder Shelby, she's the creative director, so I can disappear for a month and not be part of the process, and the game keeps on trucking, no problem. But I have friends who are both the creative director and the CEO, and they really struggle in the fundraising period.
Got it. And then in terms of the process steps, does it look something like you get your intros, you're doing all your pitching, you get a term sheet, you negotiate the term sheet, and then there's, and then it closes and you get the money in the bank? Is that basically the process?
There's a long form. It depends on whether you're raising are you raising on a safe or some kind of like convertible thing, which is going to be easier and faster. If you're doing a price round, then there's term sheet, then there's long form, and each of those takes quite a bit of back and forth, and just it's always going to take much. All of these steps are going to take much longer than you think. So give it a lot of time and prepare for people to be slow.
Yeah, my theory on kind of like your active fundraising is that you kind of, all the VCs are always going to ask you that, who else have you talked to? What did they say? Who's interested? So you need to create that moment, the momentum, and the kind of situation where you're able to tell that, actually I've spoken to these guys and everyone's interested. So that's the active part. You've created your deck, and you decide that unless you're kind of running out of money by the end of the year, and you know that, okay, Q4, if this doesn't happen, we're out of money, and then so that's probably your 100% of your time. If it's Q4, you're going to run out of money unless you make it happen. Then you probably do everything to make it happen. But if you're kind of if you've got the runway and you think that now there's a good opportunity for fundraising in terms of market, the progress you've made, then my advice would be that you kind of get your deck together, you schedule in, like, I'm going to contact all of these guys over the next month, and then you start talking, and that's going to help you so that you're able to tell these other guys that there's competition, because I've been talking to all of these guys, and it's probably going to happen next month, and so on. And because that's, I think, the closing, it's going to be the kind of most exciting and thrilling part of this roller coaster. Once you've gotten the term sheets, then of course it's about negotiation, and it's kind of a little bit nicer part of the journey, unless you've gotten bad papers. But I would say in games and the VCs that are typical, I would expect that no one's going to kind of, you're not going to get bad term sheets. You're going to get pretty nice terms and stuff. So yeah, the hype and the momentum is going to be your active fundraising, and it definitely will take a lot of your time. But you want to kind of cap it into some sort of a time period.
And Antti, in terms of your point about sharing information, once let's say you get a term sheet, like what is the protocol? Is it cool to share the valuation? Do you not tell the valuation to the other investors interested in your studio? And one of the things I learned is that you're apparently not supposed to tell another investor who the investor is that has given you a term sheet. But I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there's some courtesy. Probably, I'd also be asking this question from my VCs from Play to get kind of an idea. So I think these guys might know a little bit better.
My perspective, I think there's sort of two parts. One is, agree with Antti, I've been very honest, sort of super straight shooter with all of our investors. So I would just ask them. And this was my first time raising. So, for me, for what it's worth, I've been in business a long time, but I'm a total newbie when it comes to raising and the entrepreneurial path. So I just was very honest. I wouldn't say childlike, but I would go out there and just say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. How do you do this? And I'd ask an investor, hey, can I share this with the other guys? I'm like, we'd prefer if you don't. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I was just very honest, very open. I asked lots of people for advice. I tapped on every door I could in the industry and said, hey, this guy said this, is that okay? And they're like, well, that seems weird. And I'll reach out to them. So I just was very open, talked to everybody honestly, shared as much information as I could. I'm a big believer that these sort of secrets that don't really help you. It's more about going fast and finding the right partners and working hard. So we really didn't keep a lot super secret. We weren't, I got to hide this. We're just open, honest, went as fast as we could. And then the other thing I'll say about the story and the process was I can't, at least from my perspective, and again, I'm new at this, but from my perspective, when the story's right, and I can't sort of or say how important the story is, when the story's right, it clicks, it goes really fast. When the story's wrong, you'll sort of go, nobody likes my thing. It's their problem. So early for us, our story didn't quite click. So we had a hard time raising. Later on, when we got our story right, it clicked and we had a lot of attention really fast. And you can see the difference. You can see when you're pitching to somebody and they're like, yeah, oh my God, I got to be part of that, versus like, huh? And so we figured that out, and we had some good advice and some people around us that helped us refine our story. And once we got it right, boy, it was a whole world of difference. So for what that's worth, the story and refining that really matters. You can do that through iteration and just keep throwing it at investors and seeing if they stick, or you can get good advisors and good help to people who've been through this before to kind of nudge you along. And I think we were fortunate that we had those advisors to help us refine that story. And once we did, it worked really well.
I think it's both, like getting as much advice and like doing practice pitches with friends and getting other people to look over your deck. But there's just no replacement for having those conversations and getting the feel of it. But I completely agree with Travis, like in terms of when it clicks, you really get it. When we were raising for Congregate, we've been doing it. The thesis hadn't changed, but we've been talking for, 4 or 6 weeks. And then suddenly my brother figured out how to articulate the emotional story and the player journey behind it. And you could just feel it. Like when it's right, you can feel the emotion coming out of people. That's actually the thing that makes me most nervous about raising for Series A in COVID times, is that it's going to be over Zoom. And am I going to feel it the same way when I can't just see if I'm not in the same room, if I can't see everybody's faces, like how is that going to feel? And I will, we'll see. But when it's right, when it's connecting, you totally feel it.
And then, Emily, in your case, it sounded like you had a couple of situations where you had a competitive investment situation. And so the question for all of you, in this case, when you've got multiple investors, trying to invest in your company, how do you select the best partner? How do you evaluate the different investors out there?
So, for me, valuation is actually a little bit like a lot of people go in and think valuation, and that matters, but like mostly it's going to be in the same range. Yeah. And so for me, it's about the relationship with a person and how are we going to work together? Because you're going to, in a success situation, you're going to work together this is going to be, in a way, your boss for 4 years, 7 years. How are you going to talk about things, and how are you going to talk about things as the business changes? So kind of their integrity and your ability to communicate with each other is really, really important. Then what background do they have? What else have they invested in that they've seen that could be helpful to you? Do they have an operational background? Are they going to really understand what you're doing? I definitely prefer people who have some operational background because it gives them more insight into what you're going through. And I was very deliberately hoping, for our seed round, we were talking to both general VCs and game-specific VCs, and I wanted a game-specific VC because I want somebody at the table who really knows games and really understands that. And so that was absolutely a priority for me. So my priorities were knows games, integrity, and then kind of terms and valuation together. And that's how I was thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. If you've got multiple, you'd want to look at the kind of contribution that they can do outside of the valuation. So as Emily mentioned, portfolio that can help you, like the other companies, and contacts, and maybe other aspects. Can they help you hiring in your local market, or with other things in like skill sets, sales, marketing, and so on. But yeah, I think I'd think that you get your game specific VCs at a fairly early round into your company, and they're kind of then you've got them checked in your board. They're in there, and then I don't know then for the future rounds of StarBerry, then how I would evaluate the different things when we've got kind of a game specific VC already around, and because I think then there's going to be, if you have too many voices and chefs in the kitchen, that might get interesting. So
and that's how I was thinking. Is seed round is where I get the game specific voice. Then A round is where you can have the more general voice who have knowledge of maybe about marketing or company scaling. And my personal experience from Congregate was the point that our VC added the most value was when we were selling and going through the M&A process, because they've gone, they're hopefully going through it on all of their portfolio, and they really helped us through that period, and that's where they added the most value.
And the other question I want to ask is, Emily, you had mentioned that when you were coming up and kind of going back to the amount to raise against the specific development milestone, you had mentioned that there's a certain amount that you need to raise to get the game to market, and then you kind of picked some spots in between. So how did you come up? Like, what are those spots, or how should entrepreneurs think about what spot to pick to determine the amount of money that they need?
First of all, however much you think you need, you probably need more. So, come up with your first number and then, up it 50% or something. Because everything takes longer, and everything is more difficult. Like, being experienced, I have a lot of experience forecasting costs, but your first time through, there's going to be way more unknowns in terms of how things will go around. I worked backwards a little bit from what the total I wanted for the company, and then also thinking through both success scenarios and failure scenarios. You need to be realistic that your first game is not necessarily going to be a success. So I was doing it from a perspective of, okay, here's what I need if I have a success. Here's what I need if we have like sort of a middling type of game. Here's what I need if we get to soft launch and the game just is not coming together, like thinking through all three of those. As it happens, the numbers were not very different between those three scenarios, because you have revenue coming in versus marketing. And then talking to friends who are VCs, I backed it into, okay, what are typical rounds and round sizes, and split it there. So, 1 to 2 on a seed round, 8 to 10 on A, and walk back from there. And then I thought, okay, what do I need to prove at each stage? So for us, we didn't want to raise on metrics. The VCs are always going to say, we want, come back when you have metrics. I didn't want to raise on metrics because that's pushing it to me too late in the process. I wanted to do it based on, a validated game prototype. However, again, if you're a newer developer who hasn't had as much success in the past, then you probably will need to plan to get to metrics, and to get that larger amount, you're going to need to show a little bit more. And so I would plan it there. So it's this combination where it's partly about what the game needs, but it's also thinking through what does the VC need, what are typical round sizes. And one comment I'll make there is that I'm in San Francisco, in the heart of Silicon Valley, and the atmosphere is different here than it is in some place like Europe. Round sizes and valuations are at a different, are sort of lower there, but also the costs of doing a startup are lower. So those things can work together.
So I guess the other question I have is, based upon what you're saying, Emily, so it sounds like you're already planning for the next round of financing. So for each of you, how are you thinking about your next round? If you're not going to have enough to launch the product, are you guys kind of thinking, well, 6 months before we need money, we're going to, have another pitch? And then how are you preparing for that next round of financing?
I guess one kind of a leading thought you might want to have is kind of, how do you get to the kind of a end game with the fewest rounds raised, so the least amount of dilution in a way. So I think that's kind of one thought for it. So the money you've raised, that kind of, as Emily said, you kind of need to have something for if the plan doesn't, and when it probably doesn't work as you planned, you kind of need that fallback plan and a bit of extra there. So I think then when you push to the next round thinking, you're kind of finding that timing that, okay, if actually things are working, we're kind of thinking, okay, milestone metrics, that's going to be kind of a trigger for the next round. And I think fewest rounds and raise as much as you can with kind of you probably anyways want to have a limited amount of dilution set in mind, let's say anywhere around 20%. So kind of you should go for how much you can get with that dilution at that next round. It's just push it.
Yeah. I think there's two ways to think about. One is when are you going to need money? But also another way to think about it is, when are you going to have shown something, and how long is it going to be until you have something that's meaningfully different, right? For us, getting to a prototype and showing it, the next big milestone, which would change people's opinions of our valuation, is metrics. But that was going to be too close to us running out of money. So there's no point waiting. So we're probably going to raise when we still have, a year plus of runway. But also, just expect your, competitive processes give you a lot of leverage, but just not needing the money also gives you a lot of leverage. So try to avoid negotiating in a situation where you need to have it in 2 months or 3 months, because again, with contracts, things take a while. You wanna be coming from a position where you can say no.
Okay, so I thought we could shift to challenges. And so for each of you, I was wondering if you could talk to me about, some of the key challenges that you faced during the early stages, just getting the company off the ground, whether it was with financing or just getting started. And then now that you have funding, what are your key challenges right now?
Sure. Yeah. So I think in the beginning, because we started with bootstrapping as well, I didn't think right away that, okay, it's going to be a VC funded company. We thought, okay, actually in Europe, you're in a nice position that actually you've got quite a bit of runway to survive with savings and with support systems, grants, all kind of things. So you can kind of dream of trying to kind of get to revenue by bootstrapping. And that's what I initially thought. So we just kind of got going but quite quickly then for us, the market, Facebook games market, the Messenger, the hype started building around in 3 months, and we're okay, this is a lot of companies that will get funded now, so it's a good timing to start talk about it. Back then, I think kind of the the challenge was I was very practical, very product driven, thinking of very detailed things. Whereas, you should be thinking of the bigger dreams and the vision and how to communicate and how to sell a pitch of a company and a bigger thing. So that's just kind of things you learn in the process to become a sales guy. I've never been a sales guy, and CEO and a startup founder, you definitely need to be a sales guy and kind of learn the ropes there. So that definitely was one of the challenges back then. And now I think, now that we're funded, I think the company building questions come around, like we're forming a culture, we're 10 people. So you should pay attention to these. That's kind of my thinking, how to kind of keep things in check and in the right path for something that kind of works out and for the longer term.
Yeah. So for the early stage of starting a studio, I'd say actually the main thing we were figuring out is, because I was coming from Congregate and was looking for a co-founder who had the game development experience and the creative lead, and was paired up with my friend Shelby, who I'd been known for a long time, but we'd never worked together. And a co-founder relationship is a really, really tight bond. I mean, I did it with my brother, which had 30 years of practice, fighting and resolving things. So I think for me, and for us, the early part was really getting to know each other and how we work together and understanding, okay, who's going to own what and how are we going to make decisions, and how are we going to make decisions about the game, and and we figured that out. It wasn't a huge challenge, but that was, I think, the biggest things that we were working on that were unfamiliar in early stage. Now we're almost a year in, and that's all figured out, and it's more, we are in the, okay, we're not prototyping anymore. We're building to scale. We're building, doubling the team size, and the whole environment is changing. And it is about kind of hiring and building a remote culture with when we can't even see each other for an offsite. And so that's the challenge. And then what's it going to be like to raise Series A over Zoom? I am optimistic, or I wouldn't be an entrepreneur. So I think it'll go just fine, but it is definitely going to be a learning experience.
Great. Travis?
I think I think everyone's entrepreneurial journey, I'm learning, is very different from each other. So again, just speaking from my personal experience, for us, our bet was a very technology-driven bet, to be honest. So games is really hard to make any game. So I'm not knocking game building, because that's hard enough. But we weren't just sort of saying we're building a game. We wanted to build some technology to make games in a different way. And so because of that, the founding partners that I needed around me, and I'll sort of, scream to how great some of my founders are, but I didn't start the company until I had a great technical co-founder, because our thesis was technology driven. And so I found a guy named Lloyd Toulouse, who's one of my co-founders. He's amazing, but I wouldn't start the company until I had that partner. And so I waited, looking for the right person. I chatted with him and a few others, but when he and I sort of really started to gel on the idea and what we wanted to do, that was really what projected us forward. So finding the right co-founders based on your thesis is really important. So for me, that took some time, but I found Lloyd, and he's amazing. So we sort of got that going. Second thing was, because of the technology that we were using, there's a bit of an arc to it. We didn't want to use technology that existed today. We wanted to shoot for the future a little bit, not crazy far, but in the future, sort of skate where the puck is going idea. That took some time. So we had to wait a little bit. And part of our service work was waiting until some of this technology matured, which is always scary because you're waiting for something to happen. And meanwhile, we were working really hard. So there's sort of a timing component to this. And then I think the last part is that because of what we were doing was technology driven and new, there was a lot of R&D we were doing. We couldn't just look to another game and say, we'll do it like that game, because there's some stuff we're doing that doesn't exist in the market. So we really were spending a lot of time in R&D land trying to crack that nut. And once we cracked it, the confidence jumped up, we were ready to go. And then for us, those were all of our big challenges. And we had to find the great co-founders, knock that challenge down, wait till the technology matured. For our company, that was a unique challenge. We had to get that right. And then we had to do the R&D on that technology now that it was mature to make it work. And then once we got that challenge out of the way, we then sort of rushed out to raise. And then the raising for us was about going faster. And I think that really resonated with a lot of the folks that we talked to. But those were kind of our big challenges.
Okay, great.
Now, the tech director was, I should have mentioned that hiring tech director was one of our biggest challenges, and being able to, that was one of our sort of triggers of we wouldn't go out for Series A until we really felt we had that leadership, which we hired post-COVID in April. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so last question, and sorry we're running a little late, but in terms of any advice that you would have for new founders out there trying to start a company right now, what advice would you have? And then also, if you have a final message for our audience, or if you're looking to hire any specific roles, it'd be great to hear about that as well. Maybe starting with you, Antti? Sure.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned in my previous answer, the kind of key decision between bootstrapping and the kind of VC fundable company, that path is something to think quite early on, so that you don't just kind of float into it. So that kind of makes you think more of building a company versus a product as well. So that's something to keep in mind. For anyone, you're building entertainment products, so you need to be kind of very passionate and obsessed about the kind of experience you're building. And I think the ultimate advice is to do it in your style, because there's so much advice and so many examples and all that. But yeah, you kind of need to have that benchmark that I'm going to do it my style and set the benchmark for something else. So it's not worth trying to be someone else in that. And yeah, we're definitely looking to grow StarBerry, and you can check out starberry.games for anything interesting there.
Okay, Emily?
Yeah, my advice is to really think about what your goals are, and also your co-founders' goals are. Because there's a lot of people who want to make games, and what they really want is an indie darling that has great reviews and everybody loves, but maybe isn't mass market and isn't going to make $1 billion. And that is a great path, but you make different choices for that path than you do if you want to make the biggest mobile game ever and make a ton of money. So really think about, okay, what are my goals, and also make sure that your and your co-founders' goals are either the same or really aligned, and then work backwards to think through, okay, what does that mean in terms of the type of business I build, the type of funding I get, and the and how we build it. Tanya Short from Kitfox wrote a really great series of Medium posts recently about thinking through the founding process, and I recommend everybody check that out.
Oh man, giving advice to other founders terrifies me. I think being passionate about a product or a service is sort of the root of it all. What's going to get you up every morning, what's going to drive you to work hard, building a team of great folks around that product or service. For me, again, it started with my technical co-founder and then bringing in other great people. And I'm fortunate to be here with you guys, but I have a great team of folks behind me who are amazing. And it took a long time to find those folks, but being passionate about a direction and then finding the right people for it. And then, if you're a founder, you've got to be passionate about raising money. Somebody once told me, the kind of CEO job is sort of set a direction, so product or service, always be getting the money because you got to pay for everybody, and then hiring great folks. And so I've been pretty disciplined about those things. And I think that tends to resonate across most of the startups that I've talked to. And then beyond that, just go fast. Go as quickly as you can to metrics, use commoditized tech where you can. If you need tech, be wary of building it because it takes a lot of time. Sort of Emily's point, things take longer than you think. But if you can use commoditized tech or off-the-shelf tech, definitely do it. If you can't, then be wary about building it because it takes time and it's expensive, but it is valuable. And I think the last thing is, do something different, take risk. We're trying to do something different and take risk. And I love seeing other entrepreneurs who are out there doing something different and taking risks. So my only advice is do those things. And I'm hoping to meet a lot of great co-founders who are doing the same kind of exciting stuff.
Yeah, one quick thing to add to Travis is that be decisive. It's better to make a mistake quickly than to agonize over a decision for 6 months or 9 months. And so if you are having trouble making decision, just do it, get it over with, and go forward. But indecision kills.
Got it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That somebody told me, have you guys ever heard the Tarzan analogy of swinging through the jungle? And you always, as a startup, you have to keep your momentum up. You just have to grab whatever vine is next. If you don't keep grabbing the next vine, you're going to lose your momentum and you'll fall to the jungle and get eaten by an animal. And that always resonated with me. In our entrepreneur experience, we had a lot of those moments where we had this idea of where we wanted to go, but there was nothing to grab onto. So we grabbed the nearest thing, which oftentimes was service work. But that ultimately led us to where we are today. But Emily's absolutely right that making decisions, not waiting, and grabbing the nearest vine to you, oftentimes will keep the company alive. And that sort of perseverance and willing to make fast decisions often separates the startups that succeed from the startups that fail.
But the corollary to that is that you need to be very honest about, did you make a bad decision, and correct it quickly. So that is important as well, because a lot of times once you make a decision, you've got the glow that it must be the best decision because you made it, but you need to be rigorous about that.
Yeah, there's what's that phrase? It's something like great thinkers have strong beliefs loosely held. And that's sort of that same thing. You sort of make a decision, you believe in it until you get any data that's a bad decision, then you drop it and move to the next one. So yeah, totally agree.
Separates startups and the kind of big corporation political work where, don't admit failure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for your time, Antti, Emily, Travis. Thank you so much. A lot of great insights. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Awesome as always. Good job.
Yeah.